Hi, I'm Gloria Mindock, editor of Červená Barva Press. Welcome to our interview series called Behind the Book. Today, our guests are Harris Gardner and Afaa Michael Weaver. Harris will be interviewing Afaa. So now I'm going to turn you over to Harris. Harris?
We're very, very happy to have the well-known national literary figure, Afaa Weaver, with us tonight. He was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and achieved his MFA degree in creative writing from Brown University and focused on theater and playwriting. The Taipei Language Institute in Taiwan, Afaa studied intermediate Mandarin for 8 months from 2004 and 2005, continuing studies. He began in 2002. Afaa has a Mandarin vocabulary of 4,000 words, and he's able to translate his own poetry into Mandarin Chinese, verbally and on the written page. Afaa has worn many hats in a substantial literary career: editor, freelance journalist, publisher with the Seventh Sun Press, which he founded, reviewer, college educator, playwright, and perhaps most significantly, a major nationally recognized multiple prize-winning poet. Most of these followed 15 years of blue-collar work, mostly at Procter & Gamble. He taught at Rutgers University, where he had tenure with distinction. Subsequently, Afaa had an illustrious 20-year academic career as a graduate professor in English at Simmons College, followed by a professorship in the Drew University MFA program. His numerous awards include an NEA, National Endowment of the Arts, in 1985, Fulbright to teach at Taiwan University in 2001, the Kingsley Tufts Award for his collection, Government of Nature, in 2013. That's a biggie at $100,000, which was a money award. Multiple Pushcart Prizes, a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2017, a Gold Friendship Medal from Beijing, St. Botolph Club Distinguished Artist Award followed in 2019, and a Literature Medal, Arts and Literature Medal from the Chinese Writers and Artists Association in that same year. In 2014, going back a bit, Afaa completed his Plum Flower trilogy with the 14th collection publication, City of Eternal Spring. In the Los Angeles Times review of the trilogy, he was compared to Walt Whitman by poet Michael Harper and the critic Arnold Rampersad. Wow, that's quite a legacy you've already established. So let's get with the first question if we can. What major influence in your youth started your career as a poet and playwright? Was there a significant moment?
Well, Harris, I was at the University of Maryland, and I was in a composition class, freshman comp, and my teacher at the time, I believe it probably was a graduate student, he said in his comments on one of my papers, he said, you are a writer of some kind. I don't know which genre, but you are a writer. And I did well in that course. And I found poetry on my own. It was an intuitive reckoning, I would use that word. And so I was about 17 years old when I actually began to scribble some really naive juvenilia. So that I was at the university, and I was transitioning from engineering into, eventually I left the university. My major was sociology when I left the university, but I had about 14 credits in English at some point.
Okay, thank you. And how did your 15 years mostly at Procter & Gamble affect your writing? I know it gave you a lot of lunchtime and break times where you did some writing, but do you want to take it from there?
Well, I left the university in the spring, the University of Maryland in College Park in the spring of 1970, and took a job in Bethlehem Steel Company and joined the military. I joined an Army Reserve Unit, the 342nd Army Security Agency. And that fall, I went into basic training out in Missouri at Fort Leonard Wood, came back to the steel mill in the spring of 71 and took the job at Procter & Gamble, where I stayed until 1985. So the first half of those 15 years were not as productive as the second half. Actually, I put together my first manuscript in 1975 when I had been at P&G for about 4 years, just about. And in 1978, 79, I got into full gear, so to speak, and became much more productive. And I gave myself 6 years to liberate myself, so to speak, from factory work. And I established a small press, and I enrolled in a program in the state of New York to finish my bachelor's, the University of the State of New York at that time, and started publishing my own work and started applying for the Guggenheim, believe it or not, and the NEA. And I constructed, I structured my time, which is to say, when I got into the warehouse part of P&G in 1975, I had more space. The packing floor is a very difficult place to work actively on your writing. So when I got into the warehouse, I had more space. And in 1980, I did my first op-ed piece for the Baltimore Sun. On November 4th, 1980, I did an op-ed on the election. It was election day. And that was the beginning of my freelance career as a journalist while I was in the factory. So I was very busy in those years. I also started studying Tai Chi in 1978. And that system of discipline, and at the time we used the word biofeedback, but that body-mind system would enable me to sort of galvanize my energies and be productive. So that's why I call it my literary apprenticeship. And so I received my NEA while I was actually working in the factory. I was in the warehouse section of Procter & Gamble. And I applied to Brown, and so I was accepted into Brown in 1985, the same year that I got the NEA fellowship. So when I arrived at Brown, I had a book in hand, my first book, I forgot that. My first book was published in that same time by Kabbalah Press under the editorship of Charles Rao at the University of Virginia. So when I arrived at Brown in the fall of 1985, I had a book and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. I had the same credentials as C.D. Wright, except she had an MFA, and she and Forrest Gardner had just come to Brown, to Providence, and she was teaching and at that time. And so she had just gotten there and just arrived. But when I got to Brown, I went into playwriting. I left poetry for playwriting. So that's where the factory work took me.
That was an interesting journey from that point forward. Moving on, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but knowing some of your background, I would think that you were influenced by Lucille Clifton and perhaps the Black Arts Movement. Would you want to talk about those couple of areas?
I met Lucille in the winter of 1974 to 75 when I was organizing that first manuscript and working on the packing floor section of P&G. When I left the university, I read the Black Arts poets. I read Langston Hughes. There were there was a very influential magazine that came from the Johnson Publishing Company that was a literary newsletter at that time. And not too long, at first it was called the Negro Digest, and then it was renamed Black World Literary Magazine. It was very important to me, and as well as a number of other people. You know, there was no internet at that time, except the military had it, but we didn't have it. And not too long after that, Hakeem Adabuti established Third World Press. He also used to publish something called Black Books Bulletin. And I bought anthologies when I could find them. And I primarily read the Black arts poets, although I also read, some of the bigger names in the early modernist period, of course, Pound and Eliot and so on. But that was all at that time, in the early years in the factory. And I took a course in the first half of the Survey of British Lit under a professor by the name of Dr. Valerie Sedlak. And Valerie became a lifelong mentor, guided me through my reading. I also met Dr. Ruth Sheffy at Morgan State, and she was very helpful. And the gentleman who was the chair at Morgan, then when I took that survey course, when I left Morgan, because it was too much to do that and work on the packing floors, he gave me the requirements, a sheet of paper that contained the requirements for a bachelor's in English. And he said, use this to guide your writing. And that's what I did for the next several years. So that was the early part, when I was from the time of 1970 until about 1978. And then around 1980, I discovered Spring Hill Church. Ed Ochester and his wife, Britt, had a book distribution business that they did out of their home as mail order. And that's when I began to read much more of the really contemporary work of non-Black poets and so. But to answer your question, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Okay, moving on, how inquiring minds, mostly my own, one would be interested in knowing how you establish a theme or direction for each of your collections. How you determine.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Harris. Finish your question.
How do you determine your subject matter? Because your themes in your 15 books cover many, many things, from family, American history and culture, Jewish history and culture, Chinese and Asian family and culture, your own family and your own experience in your family and in your background, in all the issues, where you evolved as becoming into your own as a literary giant. So going back, how do you pick or select on a given collection along each book what you're going to write about?
Well, there are different arcs in my work, and I would say if I take the book Water Song, which was my first book, and I go up to Talisman, which is the first time I use the name Afaa. Water Song titled Some Days It's a Slow Walk to Evening, out of Paradigm. And theme of migration is important in my work, and it's what's the format of the very first book, Water Song, is life in southern, in the South, further south than Baltimore, because Baltimore is southern, but the homeland of my parents and grandparents, and looking at the movement of Black people from agrarian culture to urban culture. That's the general arc in the first book. And that migration theme is played out again in my father's geography, and then in Timber and Prayer. parallel to that is a metaphysical strain, as I would call it. And that it's in some days it's a slow walk to evening, and it's in my father's geography. But it starts to and when I get to my father's geography, which I worked on in the early 90s, I also worked on at that time my ekphrastic project, a book of poems about Marc Chagall's work.
Yeah.
And that also became a place to pursue aspects of spiritual belief systems. And when I was working on that book, and because Marc Chagall's family was Hasidic, they were followers of Baal Shem Tov. And so in researching that, I encountered the Kabbalah, and the idea of the 10 Sephirot. And so the 10 points that were taken to be the body of the divine, the eternal. And it was an esoteric system developed by rabbis, a certain group of rabbis, and it's related to the Hebrew language. There are 22 characters, and inside those 10 points, there are 22 channels, and so on and so on. And then when I get to Talisman, I go into a more intensely personal exploration of my life. And then after that, there were 3 books that appeared in the year 2000. And one of them was a privately published book made at Bucknell. It was made only for collectors. Each copy was $125. It's called Sandy Point. I don't think many people know about that book. And then the 10 Lights of God about the Kabbalah and the Sephirot, that came out, as well as Multitudes from Saraban Books. University of Pittsburgh did my father's geography of Timber and Prayer. Then I left Pitt for a while and went with Saraban and the 2 presses at Bucknell and Tia Chucha, which did Talisman. My work was affected in the 90s, but when the time when I was very active in theater, I had 2 plays produced, one in Philadelphia and one in Chicago. And in Chicago, I became part of a Black think tank on the future of Black theater. And the work in theater heavily influenced my confessional work, because I learned in theater that as a playwright, I had a ways to go in terms of self-knowledge and self-awareness. And that led me to working on my child trauma. And so after the year 2000, I began working on the Plum Flower trilogy, and actually stopped writing for a while. So in 2007, the Plum Flower Dance appears, and then I began to work more closely and directly on the child trauma. And then I did a hard summation, which is historical about Black history, but also influenced by trauma. And then Spirit Boxing, which is sort of a return and a wrapping up of the whole idea of working class culture and working class interiority. So there are 15 books, Publishers Weekly doesn't seem to know how to count. They call it 11, but I think they missed some books, But I lost some readers when I changed my name. I realized that. And my name was changed legally. My first name was Afaa, or some people say Afaa, which in Igbo means oracle, someone who can tell you the present, clarify the present for you. So when I look at my work, there are 2 major periods, up to Talisman and then after Talisman. And in that first period, the work, the idea of migration becomes internal migration. And then also parallel with that is the pursuit of spirituality. And that returns in the Plum Flower trilogy and in Spirit Boxing. So I'm always about these matters of culture and family and political works that are directly political. my credo, the poem that lives at the center of my poetic sensibility, is To Malcolm X on His Second Coming. And I worked on that book for 18 years. I lost it at one point and reconstructed it, but it was heavily influenced by Amiri Baraka. And I wrote the first draft of that in 1980 on the inside back cover of the first selected edition of his work. I knew Michael Harper more personally, but in terms of the influence of my work between the two of them, it was Amiri Baraka. It was the primary influence on my work. And I made sure he knew that before he died. I wrote a letter to him, explained him, because people tended to associate me with Harper because they would see me do things with him, but it was Amiri Baraka who was my direct influence when I was very young and continued to be as I got older. So, as well as other poets, but, you know, I have a very fondness for Amiri's work. I mean, I have a real fondness for Amiri's work.
So my next question may sound a little frivolous, but it's humorous is another way to say it, not frivolous at all. But I think the response will be a touch of humor from you. And my question is, when you received the Kingsley Tufts Award, how did you celebrate? And if it's not being personal, what did you do with all that money?
Well, Harris, first of all, I didn't believe it. Chase Twitchell called me on Saturday, and I picked up the phone, and she said, "Well, this is Chase Twitchell." I said, "The poet," you know, because I was, you know, I was familiar with her work, and she said, "Yeah." She said, "I have something to tell you." I'm like, "Okay," and so she explained that I had won this money. And quite honestly, I thought it was a practical joke. And I didn't believe it. I waited until Monday when I got an email from, you know, the college out at Claremont. I did not believe it, really. Because quite honestly, I didn't think anybody cared that much about my work, Harris. And so to get that, and I said, "Now, what is this about?" You know, so when I got the prize, I took $30,000 and put it away for taxes, you know. Good old working class young man. A third of this is going to get taken from me. I'm going to put it on the side so I'll have it to pay taxes. And that's about what it took, too, a third of it. And then I bought all brand new computing equipment. I got a new desktop, two laptops, and I already had an iPad. But I said, I'm going to make sure I have all new equipment. And then I bought some backpacks. And the rest of it I put into the bank. And I still have a little bit of it left, you know, because, you know, whenever you get something, if I should get something else like that or bigger, you know, if anybody out there listening, it's going into the bank. It's, you know, it's going into the bank, you know, so that my wife and I have something to fall back on. You know, so, but, you know, I'm not, you know, I wasn't born into wealth, so getting something like that is not, you know, it's, you know, it's needed. And so I treated it that way, you know, so I didn't have anything to throw away, you know. But that's what I did with it, Harris. That's what I did with it.
Did I misremember? Didn't you get a new truck or something?
I had already bought that, Harris, and
okay.
you know, it was just I was paying that off. It was a Kia. That was a Kia, and an SUV. But no, I was very careful with that money. I did some traveling, you know, but I was very careful with that money.
Okay, there's another side aspect. You mentioned it in passing, describing your books. And how much research or involvement did you have with the Kabbalah?
Well, Harris, I read enough to get an idea of the basic theory of the Kabbalah, but that only as it pertained to the 10 Sephirot, because you're not supposed to study the Kabbalah until you have a complete understanding of the Talmud and the Torah, of course. You have to be certified. You have to be at least 40 years old in the Jewish tradition. So I was borrowing, and the Kabbalah is, I mean, it's more than a Sephirot, all right? Once you get involved in the Kabbalah, there's a mystical element to it, which is something you don't want to play around with, because as the story goes, there's real power in the Hebrew language. And once you start studying the numerical value of each letter, the power that comes out of the utterance of that sound and what it invokes, then you're playing with things you don't want to play with. So I didn't go that far, Harris. I took the understanding of the 10 lights themselves and how they were translated and what aspect of ethics and spirituality each point referred to, and I used that to write on an intuitive and imaginative level about the emanations from those lights.
Well, that's quite fascinating, just as much as you touched on it and as much as you explored. In a thumbnail sketch, you gave almost an overview of what somebody needs to do to prepare for the study of Kabbalah.
Well, people have lost their minds studying the Kabbalah, so it's not to be taken lightly.
And yet in Hollywood, it's very trendy for some of those actors and actresses to study the Kabbalah. I mean, they think it's building on their spirituality, but that's another story. But I think you're very wise in your approach to Kabbalah, and your explanation was very enlightening on that particular source. What my next question to you would be on your 15th book, which is Spirit Boxing. Can you give us some more? You touched on it some, along with your overview of your 15 of your arcs, but can you give a little more in-depth detail on how you came to that particular book, especially, and how you decided on its subject, what brought, basically the background, what brought you to it?
Well, Harris, I wanted to use my experience in working in factories to write from it, to write about it in both a historical and a personal way. And I wanted to use the philosophy of Tai Chi and Tai Chi Chuan and the I Ching to give structure to the book. There was a very good review of the book that came out of the university in New Jersey. But I think a major mistake was made in the other review. And I don't want to harp on the Publishers Weekly, but I think it was a mistake. They thought that the wheel was a metaphor for the building. The book wasn't built on a metaphor. The book is built on philosophical principles that Tai Chi embodies and that are related to the I Ching and the Bagua. There's a difference between using a metaphor for a book and then a philosophical principle as structure. And so there is a section of the book where there are, for the poem The Gray Mare and others, where each poem represents an energy or is built around the movement of an energy in Tai Chi. And so each physical movement is contained in each of those poems. And they're arranged in the accordance to the way that they're arranged in the Tai Chi movement, which corresponds to I Ching. Now that's philosophical structure. It's not metaphor. There's a difference, right? And I wanted to be clear about that. And then the idea of the image of the phoenix as an architectural trope is the way the book is constructed from beginning to end. And so the poem about the phoenixes in the Cathedral of St. John the Divine is a prelude or preview of the actual construction of the book. The book is built like a bird, right? Now, so I did that, and I also wanted to position to write about myself objectively. So there is a person in the first section of the book named Freight Train, and that was a third person objective view of myself as a way of releasing that part of my experience. So there is that goes on in that part of the book. So what led me to it was a need to write about working class culture and to write about Americans. There are books and there are poems in there about white Americans and Americans across the board. And the very last poem is a kind of epic sweep looking at the whole idea of labor in America. So that's what I wanted to do. It's a kind of big book, you know. It's a big book in that sense. You know?
Well, it sounds very large in scope and scale, and it probably took a lot of not, I won't say emotional toll, but a lot of energy in the writing of it. And I think the way you described it, people should just go to the nearest bookstore and get a copy, right? I think
thank you, Harris. Thank you, Harris.
It sounds like all your work is very individual and specific to a subject, but this particular subject demands to be read. It definitely demands. It's very timely, and so I think my last question would be, what new goals are you setting for yourself on your literary career path? I mean, you've done so much already. What else will you consider your future achievements once you get there?
Well, Harris, this is a year of my 70th birthday, and I would like to finish my memoir. My birthday's in late November, so I would like to finish it's memoir before my
November
birthday.
26th, am I right?
Yes, Harris, tell the whole world, thank you. Yes.
Well, they should send you birthday cards. 70 is special.
Well, thank you, Harris. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. But I would like to finish that, and I would like to write some essays about theater and performance, the performance of culture in theater. And yeah, I'd like to publish at least 2 or 3 of my plays. I would like to publish them and maybe write a couple more. And of course, write some more poetry. I want to write about Baltimore. And continue to review my Chinese. My teacher said in Taiwan, she said, you should review it for an hour a day. And I don't quite do that. But I just love studying my Chinese. I'm just one of those perpetual students. And I study the language. I'm not a scholar of ancient Chinese poetry, but I just love studying it. Mandarin, and so every now and then I write something very basic in Chinese, a poem. But to continue those things and my daily meditation and my Tai Chi and spend time with my wife, that's really probably the most important thing. So that's what I want to do with the time I have left, Harris. So.
Well, let's hope you have a lot further to travel on your journey. And I want to say thank you so much, Afaa. It's been a very informative interview from you, and I appreciate all your input. And I think any listening audience, once we upload it, will definitely appreciate it. And it brings more dimensional knowledge of who you are, and informs the public on your writing, your career, your achievements. You've had a glorious path that you've carved out for yourself. You need to be highly commended for what you've achieved. Not many people can equal what you've done in the literary field. How should I say, the literary trenches. You've gone very far, and it sounds like you want to go even further, which is again commendable. I can think of a couple things, but it's an 8-letter word. And it's not pushcart. You won many pushcarts, but you and I have a little inside joke. Do you remember that? What was the other 8-letter word?
Let me see.
Starts with P.
Let me see. Let me see. Is it Phoenix or
no?
Pineapple? No, pineapple has too many letters.
It's a literary award.
Oh, well, I give up, Harris.
No, I've been saying all the time I've known you that, the people who decide who's going to win the Pulitzer had better wake up, because, that should be forthcoming at earliest opportunity. And that's in my personal opinion. But
Harris, that's a nice thought, but I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Oh, you might be surprised. I mean, you have the energy out there, Afaa. So I mean, you're producing, you're productive in so many areas of literature. How can they not? That's my attitude. How can they not?
They just say no. That's how they do it, Harris. They say no.
Well, then they're very, how should I say, the vision is very limited in that case.
Well, Harris,
anyway.
Harris, thank you for your support on that, Harris. And if that should happen, well, first of all, I have to do another book. But if that should happen, I will definitely treat you to dinner. Kristen and I will take you to dinner.
At least a cup of coffee. So on that note, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for Gloria for sponsoring the Behind the Book series that made today possible. So again, Afaa, great seeing you again. And it was great hearing all your offerings today. It was remarkable. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Harris. Take care.
Say hello to Kristen for me.
I certainly will.
Take good care of yourself, and hope to see you sooner rather than later.
Okay.
Take good care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.